Welcome to the You Matter podcast, where we host interesting people and have enlightening conversations. My name is Ned Burwell, and I'll be your host.
Hello, everybody. I'm here with Tony O'Callahan. He's an artist, a sculptor, and a storyteller. And I think he's a historian. Like, I remember 20 years ago, him coming into my shop, telling stories, doing some Celtic carving.
Yep.
Certainly an interesting person who has gathered a lot of wisdom and dispenses that wisdom through telling stories, through creating art. And it's just such a pleasure to have you here today, Tony.
Well, it's mutual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we kind of go back like at least 20 years.
20 years, yeah.
I was buying
it's just a little over 20 years. We were supplying you with sculpture, and you did my little arm piece on here, and yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been, you're a person that I've always really looked up to, in the sense that the stories that you carry so much wisdom, and anytime I've ever got around you, I felt like I was a better person for it, because you have a depth of insight that I think not a lot of people have. And maybe it's through your art, through your visionary abilities, just your studies, or a combination of all of that.
Well, there's also a free university out of there. If you talk to people reveal their knowledge. And it's like my dad was a Shanachie, an Irish storyteller. So we used to go to the Irish clubs, and he'd tell the stories and ask the kids what the story was about, and, what the moral behind the story was. And I'd say, "Is that a true story, Dad?" He'd say, "It depends how you tell it." and that was the wisdom behind storytelling. So it's the same thing when you listen to people. There's something inside our own psyche that says, that makes my gut feel right.
Yeah.
So there is always an element of truth in all stories. Embellishment is the idea of making it stick in memory.
That's right.
So the bigger the characters are, the more bravado it is, the better we learn it. But behind it is the moral to the story, and that gives us a rule of life.
So, being a person who's gathered many stories, what do you think the importance of stories are?
Well, firstly, it's only from the mistakes we make in the past can we divine the future. But if we don't tell these or educate people with these stories, then it's passed over. These mistakes are not mistakes that are going to cause a calamity. They're mistakes till they become a calamity. And that's a great problem in education today, is that we're not telling all the truth. Obviously, you can tell by my accent, I wasn't born in Canada and I wasn't brought up in North America. But when I had schools in England and we grew up there, we were told limited amounts, and obviously a great bias about the colonialism in North America. Mm-hmm. But it was only coming here and then having friendships with First Nation and Métis peoples to realize that there was other sides to the stories going on, and that people like the Hudson Bay Company were not nice people. They were actually greedy sods and highly violent. And then, of course, I learned an awful lot about the church with what the Jesuits did, and then, of course, what the church did to these people. But that's a subjugation that's happened with all races. We always want to be different. So storytelling, the only way you can harmonize is to make everybody included in the stories. Mm-hmm. And I've learned that over years now, and I'm starting to embrace bringing in stories from other cultures, because suddenly I realize those stories, the only difference is that the characters' names are different and the geography is different. But the actual emotions, the events are all exactly the same. Mm. And it goes back to the thing is that we're all the same regardless. We're all earth pilgrims. We have nothing else really that comes in a bigger contrast. We walk upon the earth, we're part of the earth, etc. And regardless of color or race or wealth, etc., if we embrace that, we can get on. We're in very difficult periods now. So storytelling and the storyteller is incredibly important character. And if you go into indigenous peoples, the storyteller is the history maker. He's he's the guy who has the memories and can pass that on generation by generation verbally. And of course, they were venerated in Romani Gypsy. The Shuhuvanis, who were healers, were also storytellers. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, a great healer will have fantastic stories about all the great healing they've done. You know, I did a brain transplant. No, you didn't. Okay, well, you know, I was joking on that one, but I fixed his head. And again, the drama of the storyteller. My dad used to have a big walking stick with this very ugly old man's head carved into the top of it. Mm-hmm. And when the children listened to the stories and they spoke back and he'd ask them questions, they didn't talk to him. They talked to the stick. Mm-hmm. Because it was something that's where they heard the voices coming from. Yeah. And it's like, if we focus on not one small point, if we start listening to the voice coming through to us, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's coming out of a radio or even on the end of a telephone. Mm-hmm. We're listening to it, but we focus on how the story takes us to different places. And I do that with artwork. My dad was all about verbal, and I wanted to do artwork that represented his stories because there wasn't anything there. Mm-hmm. So when I got to Canada, being 6,000 miles away from anything Celtic, I opened a studio called Studio Culture, which was to amplify Celtic art, which I was quite familiar with. I wouldn't do it back home in Ireland and England because the real McCoy was down the street, but I was 6,000 miles away from it. And lo and behold, here's this huge amount of people of Celtic origin here, etc. So it was the perfect timing. Mm-hmm. But that's slowly changing as we're getting into these times where obviously we've gone through the things of cultural misappropriation in art, etc., which is constantly was beamed out 10 or 15 years ago. Now we're embracing by bringing cultures together within art. And that's where I'm sitting right now, is that we have so much to learn from everybody's past and our stories, and to create visual adaptation of those stories. That's my goal now for the next decade, if I can make it through that. But that's the important part about things. So stories and the piece of artwork will always have a story or a moral behind it, because it's the only thing that makes it memorable. Some pieces of art I've sold and people have come back. They've got halfway home and come back and said, do you have a piece of paper with the story on it? Because that was an element that was almost more important. And so many artists who don't tell the story, they don't tell a story about their art. They know the story in the head. They just don't know how to talk it.
And I find in my work, telling stories through art and then verbalizing those stories has been such a powerful experience for me. And then when I decided to put the pen to paper and start writing stories,
same thing.
You know, when you look at all the classic stories that are out there, they always have some of the same components.
Yes,
and they've figured out the science behind it. Every story has three acts and 15 beats to hit in that story, and it follows a certain rhythm. And when they figured that out, what they were doing is they're just looking back into history,
sure,
how we've told stories. So stories are so deeply embedded in our DNA.
Yep.
We passed on wisdom for thousands of years through story, and we used stories to preserve the most important and fundamental things that we needed to remember.
Well, Joseph Campbell, that's what he said. He said that we go back to Neolithic times. There are 10 masks that were used by shamans or the holy men and the storytellers that they wore. And those masks involved emotions. They involved the moon, which was very important for the tides and also for hunting as hunters, the sun. So all these masks all collectively went together and created stories. Almost every spirituality from those masks has followed through to even where we sit today. Yeah. There isn't any religion out there that hasn't got formative parts of it that came directly from a much older religion in the first place, which probably came from a little guy sitting in a cave, throwing on his mask, painting his body, and reenacting things that made sense to the people around him and warned them. Stories are for lifting, not for putting down. We have to learn that even more now with our social media. Yeah. That the most important thing is elate. So, I mean, storytelling has to be uplifting. It can be embellished, but as long as the core of it has the elements of truth and makes sense, and your body memory and your ancestral memory will just grab you by the gut and say, yep, that's exactly it. And I've heard this, and I don't know where I've heard it. I don't know whether it came through my ears just in the atmosphere, or whether it was told by a grandparent, or whether I heard it while I was still sitting in my mum's belly, and I heard conversation that's going on. There's knowledge coming to us all the time. The biggest problem is taking knowledge and turning it into wisdom. And I'm on that path already trying. I get kids on my booth. I've got a studio booth at a market in London, which is fun because I meet a lot of people and I can still yab away on stories and the rest of it. But I talk to young kids who are coming along who are going, yeah, I want to be an artist, etc., but I can't do that. And I say, what do you want to be? And they give me a dollar figure that when they grow up, I've got to have 100 grand or I've got to make 150 grand because that's the only way I can live. And I'm saying, well, what are you going to do to get that? Oh, I have no clue. But that's what my teachers are telling me. Yeah. So what I'm thinking, why are my teachers or why are teachers promoting that it's about money? It's about being a good person. That the money will come to you if you put out the right kind of vibe. And if you're going to be, you create good karma, everything comes back to you. You create bad karma, it comes back to you fivefold. So, yeah, I mean, yes, I think those ancient stories is that we haven't learned anything. And that goes back to, it's important to understand our past because you can't think of a future if you're going to make the same mistakes over and over and over. In North America, nobody teaches history. They don't teach it. Why would you? Because now we can still make the same mistakes, and we're seeing it in politics. We're seeing it in religion over and over and over again. I was telling Ned earlier about that I've been trying to read the Mahabharata, the 18-day war from Indian Vedas, they're great books. And there's a part in the beginning where there are two brothers and they're given a tree each. And they both would take water and they would water the tree. And then the one brother says, I like your tree better than mine. And the brother said, no, this is my tree. So he takes a rock and he smashes his brother over the head and kills him. And that was the first death. And it was because of jealousy, etc., a learned habit. Well, then in Bible, it talks about Cain and Abel with exactly the same kind of thing. So these stories have been focused from time immemorial. Once we could sit in a cave with a fire going and we could communicate, whether it was through pictographs or through language or of some kind, we told stories to remember things.
Well, the Red Hand of Ulster, the the two sons fighting over the throne, and the one cuts his hand off and throws it ashore.
Exactly. And the same thing went about the ninth wave with Amazon, who came in and defeated the Tuatha De Danann. And then when they were defeated, he said, everything above ground belongs to now the Milesians, or the Milia Spania, but everything below the ground can be for the Tuatha De Danann. So he's basically saying, when your enemies are in the ground, they can stay in there and they can do what they want down there, because that's not where we're going. Stories are stories, but they give you some tidbits for what's going on in the world and in your world. And we have a broader world than we have ever had before, but we're not learning an awful lot.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think one of the things, I haven't read the Bhagavad Gita thoroughly enough to really make a comment, but one of the things that I gleaned from reading that text was about when Arjuna realized that he had to slaughter his family, his humanity came up. And it's a story about conflict and darkness. And it's a story that, brings up the idea that who is not family in this world. And when Krishna enlightens Arjuna while rushing into battle, his humanity came up in such a deep way that he understood, he was actually just killing himself on the other side of the battlefield.
100%. When he killed his half brother, which was Karna, who he didn't even realize that his mother had given birth to when she was a child. I mean, and that was because of other things that she'd been tricked into as well at the same time. I think, yes. I mean, again, you look at the hero complex. The hero is usually a sad thing. It's usually from the tragedies. And out of tragedy, you should learn. Mm-hmm. We're seeing so many epic tragedies, but we're not learning from them because we're not studying the past. We're not enjoying the past. There is good stuff everywhere, and there's good stuff on a day-to-day basis, simple stuff, which is important. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we need to get the most out of people.
Yeah. So when you and I spoke on the phone a few weeks back, you were talking about one world coming together, collaboration, yep. And it's sort of where you feel like your focus has gone in the more recent years.
100%.
Share with me a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, the whole thing is I've always enjoyed talking to people and finding their origins. And you find where people are from, where they're from India. We got a lot of people coming in from India or Sri Lanka, et cetera, et cetera. But I've met a lot of people from South America, et cetera. And I'm realizing I'm listening to their stories and I'm listening to the things that are going on, et cetera, et cetera. And then I listen to the big focus that they had in India, where they were looking at how to green the world, how to get away from fossil fuels, etc. And their motto had suddenly become one tribe, one village, one earth. And it struck me that's exactly where we need to be in. The earth's not in danger. We are. The earth can recover from anything, but we're going to be the one with great losses. But who is going to be the first to go? And the first is going to be the poor, those without, the people who are in the damnedest places. So learning about other people draws you closer, and then nobody's excluded, because exclusivity is the biggest danger that we have in the world today. That creates a hierarchy and a caste system that we've tried to abolish, and it's coming back in a big way. So one tribe, one village, one earth.
And if we take this to an individual basis of how can I create that in my life, in my community, I think what comes to mind for me is that we have to seek to understand. We have to learn how to engage in interest of listening.
Sure.
In deep listening, like I was interviewing a guy from Australia, and he was talking about deep listening with all of our senses. And I think that's what's important and what's needed now is that when you come together with another person, get curious about them.
100%.
Listen to what they're saying. Try to extract, are they saying something directly to me? Is there a message between the words? And what is the energy that's being transferred in this conversation? So, and I think that's what will help us become one tribe, because when we understand, we move closer.
100%. And I think I think it really makes somebody feel good from a faraway place when you have a little bit of knowledge about where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
We've got all the information worldwide that we ever need. We just got to look at it now and then. School didn't finish, whenever you suddenly left it. School is every day of your life until the day you peg off from this and become an ancestor who's tapping your young uns on the shoulder behind saying, no, that ain't right.
Peg off.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the point at the end of the day, is we have to take an interest in others because they'll take an interest in us.
Tony, when I look across your social media and some of the things that you posted, sometimes it tells you what people are interested in and a little bit about what they're about. And nature, that's a theme that comes up constantly. How has nature helped you, and what do you think the importance of nature is?
We all have spirituality, but the greatest spirituality is nature itself. There is so much going on. You can walk into a pine forest, breathe the air, angry, fearful, whatever heavy-duty emotion, and within 30 seconds, it's gone. You've forgotten what you were angry about, and you're sitting there. I had a buddy called Charlie. This guy was a walkabout guy. He'd just disappear, and he'd walk miles and the rest of it with his dog, and then he'd come back a year later. And he did incredible little tiny bone carvings like Netsuke. And his client was Thompson of Thompson Industries, multi-billionaire Canadian, who bought everything off Charlie. But Charlie, you couldn't tell from him. And we in my studio, we had some small changing rooms, and he rented one to do his work. But Chuck, me and him would go into the woods, and we'd go down into Westminster Ponds in London, and he'd get a flute out, and he'd start playing a flute. Well, it scared the bejeebers out of people. They thought the fairy people had popped out of the land. But it was just, I'm going, wow, it's beautiful, Charlie. And I said, what's it called? He said, I don't know. He says, I just start playing the notes, and the notes keep going, and the rest of it. And I thought, yeah, you're listening. And there he was, and his shoes and socks were shoved in a bag on his back as soon as we got in there, and he'd get thorns stuck in his butt and God knows what. Mm-hmm. But the point was, he was drawing off the sounds of the forest. Ancient ancestors could speak the language of birds. And in fact, there are some tribes in the Amazon who speak in whistles. Their language is in whistles, and they deal with birds. It attracts birds, which are predatory birds that lead you to the hunt, etc., etc. And they can do mating calls, and they understand everything about birds. It was the whole thing. Nature is just abundant. I don't kill anything. Yes, I eat meat, and I think it does come out of a butcher's cupboard and not off something that's running around, but I love animals. And I think it's just a changing kaleidoscope throughout the year of inspiration. So I create all sorts of pieces out of what nature provides me. You cannot suddenly sit up one day and say, oh, I couldn't do any art today because I couldn't afford the materials. I ain't buying them. I get a better kick out of finding 4 twigs in the park, sitting under a tree, turning it into a little walking fairy guy and selling it for $25 to a passerby who said, "Oh, I really like that." Well, there you go. Nature provided it. It worked for it. And of course, here we have an abundance of nature. We have the largest landmass in the world with the smallest population. We have, when I open a map of Ontario and I see this big white thing at the top, I'm thinking, what a waste of paper. No, that's Northern Ontario. Well, there's nothing on it. Yeah, that's right above the line. It says that's the tundra. Well, wow. So we are filled with an abundance. We don't need to chop away the living. We need to learn how to manage the natural resources in this country. I have a dream about one of these days of just going up to the arboreal forest and walking and trying to find the king of the forest. You know, the guy with the horns on his head and who's dancing around, and he's got all the beasts sitting in there in judgment, and I'll be happily sitting on a log and taking notes. Nature provides me with an abundance of material, inspiration, warmth, and I've learned that Gothic horror stuff doesn't make you feel happy, but you stick a female face staring out of the bushes with leaves coming out on it, you are engulfed by it. You want it. It's Mother Nature, and we're all part of it. Mm-hmm. And we're not above it. We're part of it. And I think when we learn those lessons, it's going to help us to achieve the thing of one tribe, one village, one earth. Mm. At the end of the day, we've forgotten how to walk upon the earth, and that's something we need to be able to relearn.
100%, and to learn how to absorb the quietness of nature, and through that quietness, we start to hear different stories come up in ourselves, and nature will provide a story that we might not hear if we're so noisy in ourselves.
Exactly. I mean. You know, nature provides all our food. It's simple as that. You know, we keep hearing things about, you know, if you don't look after the bees, you'll have no food. It's quite true. The bees are absolutely amazing. They do this incredible work ethic that we used to have as individual humans, as part of the species. How many people would actually know how to work with the bees in harmony and gain the abundance of the nectar that they produce? I got a friend of mine, ain't the most educated guy on the face of the planet. I think he's worked in fields most of his life, great guy. And he's a forager. So he comes in and he brings mushrooms and he brings all sorts of edible plants, as well as plants that are for medical reasons, like lion's mane, mushrooms, and chaga, and stuff like this. And we talk about fungus, and now fungus is a big hot spot, and he's an expert at it. He knows what you can eat, what you can't eat, or in his estimation, you can eat all mushrooms, some only once. But I mean, that's just part of it. But it was also about other plants, amaranth. Nature cures you. All the cures are out there. The only problem is trying to find the people who have the wisdom now how to dish it out. And that's gone, but it's coming back because it goes back to what Ned said, curiosity. If you're curious, you want to learn. It fills you. So the more curious we become, the better it is. We don't have to look at conspiracy. That's another complete word, and it shouldn't fit into anybody today. And we're seeing a lot of it. But curiosity is the most important thing. Even though the old saying, curiosity killed the cat. Well, it might kill the cat, but it won't kill you if you're curious. And if you're curious, you'll ask questions and you will learn. And like I said, none of us are too old to learn. But we aren't too old to teach. And that's the other point about it, is that whatever knowledge is gained, by our elders and our seniors. I loved listening to my grandfather, who hardly spoke.
One of my closest friends, he's such a creative guy, and there's just nothing this guy can't do. Like he's literally a modern day MacGyver. And he said to me tonight, he said, Ned, he goes, I never know what to do, but I just know that I need to start. And it's through starting that the knowledge of what we need to do will come to us.
Sure.
And I've watched how many times when I wanted to do something in life, my willingness to start, like your dad flicking his boots off and walking the earth.
Yeah.
He was starting, and then everything else comes to us.
100%.
And I think that's something, we need to learn in this society, is learn to trust, learn to do, learn to be creative, and I think that's a big thing that's been lost in our world is learning that to go and trust yourself, to be creative. There's a power in art, and I think
massive.
Art reflects ourselves. It reflects other people that we draw into that. It reflects a bit of the divine. And I think art has always had this ability to move people into the most beautiful places in their lives. So being an artist is an honor. It's also an honor to sit here with you today, Tony. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
Some of your stories and wisdom with us. And where can we find you?
You can find me where I've been 10 years now, on Saturdays and Sundays at the Western Fair Market up on the second floor. They call it the Loft, and it's filling up with local artists. It gets better every week. The tat is disappearing, and the stuff that's appealing is young artists, young creative people. So it's a great place to go. You can buy your food and vegetables downstairs, but I'm there every Saturday and Sunday.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Tony.
You're welcome.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you for taking time to listen. Stay tuned for our next episode of the You Matter podcast. Have a wonderful day.